I just gotcha. I've got the other right hand side. Kia ora, good morning. Can I call on our Deputy Mayor to lead with karakia? Oh, gosh.
Tēnā koe, Mr Chair, o tira tēnā tātou katoa. Me tīmata tātou mā tētahi karakia, tū tawa mai i runga, tū tawa mai i raro, tū tawa mai i roto, tū tawa mai i waho. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, haumi e, hui e, tae ki e. Ngā mihi kia koutou.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Ngā mihi, Councillor Marshall. Can I just cover some housekeeping before we move into the agenda? That to explain that this meeting has been recorded and will be streamed onto the Council's YouTube channel. Explain that the health and safety procedures are on the screen for fire and emergency. The meeting point, if we do need to leave this building, is Te Marae o Hine, the square at the clock tower. Smoking is prohibited. There's a defibrillator on the front of house ground floor. And any incidences or near misses, please report to the administrators. This meeting does have online participants. We have both Councillor Pat Hancock and Councillor William Wood online for this meeting. Please introduce yourselves as you speak into the microphone. That's for submitters and staff and online participants. And that is the basics. Can I move into the apologies now, which is item 2, and have apologies for the Mayor for late arrival, who was on council business, and Councillor Lorna Johnson, seconded by Councillor Naylor. Are there any others? I now invite a vote. That is passed 12 votes for and none against. That moves us on to item 3, notification of additional items, which there are none. Item 4 is declarations of interest. Are there any? Deputy Mayor.
Tēnā koe, Mr Chair. With item 6, I have one of the submitters, number 3 is my daughter, and however I believe I can consider the matter with an open mind. And number 19, with regards to the Kokonga Pauri Te Whatu Raranga group, I'm the patron of that organisation and I will remove myself from any decision making on that. Thank you.
Thank you, that's noted. Are there any others? There be none. There's no public comment for this hui, which moves us on to item 6, which is the hearing of submissions for Pinnacle Place. Before we move into the submitters, I need to pass 2 recommendations. That the Strategy and Finance Committee hear submissions from presenters who indicated their wish to be heard in support of their submission. And 2, that the committee note the procedures for the hearing of submissions as described in the procedure sheet. I'll move that. That's seconded by Councillor Naylor. Any discussion? I'd now invite a vote. That's passed 12 votes for and none against. That moves us into the submissions, which there is one. And I'd now like to call forward Annette Nixon, who is familiar with this chamber. Submission number 17 on behalf of Riverstop Awapuni. Ngā mihi, Annette. On the right hand side is the microphone. And do I need to do anything? There we go.
Ata Marie, Mr Chair, Vaughan, and councillors and council officers. It's a bit of a surprise to see that I'm the only one who wants to speak about this, but I was very heartened to see that in all there were 17 submitters and that the majority of them were well in favour of the proposal to reclassify Pānako Park. I was very heartened that in the Awapuni community, where we don't get a lot of opportunities to be able to express an opinion about what goes on in the area, that people had taken that opportunity to make comment. Riverstop continues to operate on a very informal basis with some of the business people. David Chappell from St Matthew's Church. I'm representing Pathways Presbyterian Church, St Mark's area. And also a new member has come to join us, Christina McNeil from the After School Kids. So, and from time to time we have other people who become involved. For example, one project under development at the moment is a storyboard walk down at Ahamati Park. So that's brought in an author who lives in the area and also an illustrator, and has involved Todd and his team and contacts also as part of that project. So we're also planning for our next local history event, which will be early next year, for the Boho birthday event, 7 years, which will be in November. So things just keep happening down there. And of course this weekend is the St Matthew's Plant Fair, which has been going since in the Awapuni area since 1968. And when it moved from Riverdale Kindergarten to St Matthew's, it's right in the middle of the village, and the library, I think, is doing something special to link in with it, and also Mrs. Bowes Emporium and Curiosity Shop is having a garage sale, a boot sale out in front. So it's a lovely opportunity for a community-linked event. So if you're not doing anything Saturday morning, very good pickled onions, Tangi Utakeri, is always a customer. We're very pleased to wholeheartedly support this reclassification of Pānako Park. And as a community, we can never have too many community facilities. And I can say that with some experience of having been involved with the Awapuni Community Centre since, I think, 1981. And I'm currently on the committee there, but I'll refer to that again in a moment. So with the guide ownership, the facility has been largely underutilised. So it's very good to see that there will be an opportunity for a range of community services to come in there. And I was particularly interested in David Mollard's submission, where he talked about a Kai Resilience Hub for the Awapuni community, because one of the things that we have repeatedly commented on to draft annual plans through Awesome Awapuni, through the Presbyterian Church, through Riverstop, is about having a community garden and orchard in that area. Because while community gardens are all very well, they are usually not visible to the public. And therefore, it's very hard for people to understand exactly what a community garden is. So I think that that area does offer great possibilities. I'm not sure which service groups have indicated that they have an interest in using the hall, and I'm not sure what arrangements are going to be made, for the upgrading of the hall, and also, hopefully, for the removal of the old Scout storage building. And at the draft annual plan time, and also in submission 16 on behalf of Pathways Presbyterian Church, with the Church Council, they encouraged me to put forward this submission, which was about the fact that there is a need for some dynamic development on that site, and that as the reserve shares a boundary with Pathways St Mark's, we have repeatedly told council that there needs to be some development there, and we have also pointed out the fact that the Scout storage area has spouting that doesn't work. Stormwater flows on to the Manse building where there is a family in residence, and just creates a situation which does not encourage the place to be looked at as a healthy home or a healthy site. So there are things to be done, and we're very pleased to see that perhaps there's an opportunity for getting these things attended to. In referring to the fact that you can't have too many community buildings and too many networks within an area, when the Awapuni Community Library closed, 24th of April, the guide hall was used by two of the children's groups, one for the Te Reo group and the other for, I think, Jumping Jelly Beans. Really good that they could move there and the programs could continue. And of course other facilities, Boho became the book club base, and the Let's Grow Awapuni group met at St Matthew's Church. So the community, and St Matthew's also provided the car parking area for the mobile library. So in times when you need a high level of resilience within a community, community spaces are very important. Now, the guides, I think when I was on council, probably around about 2010, there were complaints from Pānako Place residents about parking. So I met with some of the community people and the guide people, and I'd also talked within the Presbyterian Church about the people using the hall, using the St Mark's car park, and would the guides like to put in a path between the car park and their driveway. So while the church was very happy for that to happen, in fact, no action was taken by the guides to make that possible. So there are opportunities like that that still exist. One of the comments that's been made recently to be considered by the incoming committee who meet at first time in October at the Awapuni Community Centre is whether or not the management committee of the Awapuni Community Centre would also be able to manage the use of Pānako Place Hall. Now the situation is that at our AGM we had a great attendance, but most of the people who came along were the office holders within their own groups. And they were not inclined to put themselves forward for the committee, and they were not inclined to step forward to be the chair. So at the current situation, we have 6 people who have indicated that they'll be on the committee, but we would like to have 9 or 10, and our goal was for 10. So we have no chair either. So it's really, with volunteers taking on these tasks, it's a big ask these days. And I have a feeling that it's something that a new committee will not be inclined to agree to. So how the management of Pānako Place Hall is carried out is something that you'll have to have a think about. Now, while I'm here and before you start thinking about questions, do you know the history of that hall? I wonder if anybody does. But Robert Cleaver, who in 1973 became the organist at St David's Presbyterian Church down in Main Street on the corner of Rainforth Street, says that he has a memory of 1966 when he and his sister attended Bible class as for a visiting event because they were at St John's, and the hall was located on the lawn area in Rainforth Street at the back of the church. So we've got the street, the hall, and the church with the back entrance, or the entrance to the church kind of facing onto a path and facing onto the hall. So it was a hall that was used as a gym facility, but also as a storage area. So sometime between 66 and 73, it was moved to Pānako Place. So it's rather nice to think that a Presbyterian resource from there ended up next door to a Presbyterian resource in Awapuni. But I was very grateful to Robert Cleaver for sharing that story. Robert's a church organist and also musician, and he comes down to provide music at the local history events we do in Awapuni, which is how the conversation got started. Apart from saying that we're wholeheartedly supportive of this change of status, I don't think at this stage I have any. Oh yes, there's one more thing. Just remember there's a paper walkway between Pānako Place and Awapuni Community Park. So it would be very nice to see that opened up, and what a lovely opportunity it would make for a community facilities hub in both areas to have that immediate connection. And it is a walkway designed without a dog leg in it, so therefore much more user-friendly. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Annette, for coming in today and presenting your submission. Unfortunately, there's no further time. The time has been concluded, and used. Again, that completes our time. Could I also add thank you for your history that you brought forward regarding the hall. It's enlightening for the background. Can I invite Aaron Phillips, who is the Activity Manager for Parks, to come forward and present the summary of submissions report for Pānako Park, a reclassification proposal. Thank you, Aaron.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and councillors. A pretty straightforward one. As the submitter has noted, there were 17 submissions, of which 88% or 15 were in support of the proposal and 2 opposed. As you're aware, process-wise, we have the hearings and we respond to the submissions in the next report in case the submitters during the hearings raise any particular new matter not covered in their written submissions. The only thing I'd perhaps add, taking the report as read, is that there were 2 submissions through social media that also noted some opposition to the proposal. Again, talking about similar issues raised in submissions 14 and 15 about car parking and safety in the cul-de-sac. So those matters are already covered by the written submissions and not new issues. Otherwise, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Aaron. I'll open it up if there are any from members. Councillor Barrett. Oh, I might have just go again.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Aaron. Just one question arising from your commentary there where you spoke about submissions received on social media, and just wanted some clarification around the standing of social media comments or interactions relative to other forms of written submissions, and whether there's any differentiation there.
The Parks process is to include the social media comments as an appendix to the report, but the written submissions are taken as the formal consultation process. So we like to highlight them, but we haven't added them into the numbers and the calculations of the formal submissions.
Great, thanks. Thanks for clarifying that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Zebulon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Aaron. We just heard from our submitter that there's potential, if the parties were agreeable, to create a pathway between the car park at St Mark's and the Girls High Hall. Just wondering, in your view, whether, if the parties were to undertake something like that, whether that would address some of those car parking issues that were in those two submissions?
Potentially, yes, assuming that kind of there's no conflict of the timing of the activities between the two areas. I'd be reluctant to rely on it in a long-term sense as a requirement without appropriate legal mechanisms in place. So would there be an easement over the car park to say it would be permanently available? And I'm assuming that I can't speak on behalf of St Mark's, but certainly an informal arrangement would potentially help the opposition of some of the submitters' oppositions, but it couldn't be relied on unless it were formally arranged. Yeah, if something changed and either party wanted to change things, that would be at their discretion.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Harpiter.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Aaron. Just a question around process. The social media post, is that a policy of council that they're not included as a formal way of collecting that?
I can't actually answer that question, Councillor, and I'm a bit remiss in not knowing that.
Is there someone from council that can answer that? Because it is a way of communicating with our community. Is there someone from council that can answer that?
Yep, let's ask. Is there anyone that's in a position to give a response? We're just going to pass the mic. Thank you, Donna.
Donna Baker, Acting Chief Executive Unit Manager. There's no formal policy around the use of social media as far as submissions go. That is something that we can look at, but at the moment what we are doing is capturing all of the comments and making sure that they feed back into the process. If there was a desire for them to be part of the formal process, we would need to work with governance around that. I'm happy to take that away and come back to you.
So do you need a formal recommendation from us?
I don't think on this item. I think we'll explore that through other avenues. That's a separate issue.
Okay, thank you.
Did you want to have any other
No.
comments? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Aaron. That concludes our questions. I'd like to move the recommendations before us, seconded by Councillor Naylor, that are in the order paper and on the screen, that the committee receives a memorandum titled Summary of Submissions, Pinnacle Park Reclassification Proposal, presented to the Strategy and Finance Committee on the 20th of September. Open it up for any comments or debate. There being none. Oh, sorry, Councillor Harpiter.
I can't really not say this. I do think that our social media is a form of communication with our public, and we do need to, if they are going to make the effort of making comments, we actually need to include that in all of our collection information. So we need to, as a council, as fast as we can, make a policy that we are going to do that. So I just needed to put that into a comment. Thank you.
Can appreciate that. And that's something that we can discuss and explore outside of this decision. But take your point. They've made the effort. I won't comment more. But I will invite a vote. That's passed, 12 votes for and none against, unanimous. The confirmation of the minutes, I propose taking this as a tranche of 3. And I'll move that the minutes as outlined on the screen be approved, and that's seconded by Councillor Naylor. Open it up for any comments or queries regarding them. Councillor Zebulon.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I have an abstention for one of those minutes. I wonder if we could take that separately.
Which one?
That's item 8, I believe.
Okay, so that which is the first one here on the screen.
Yes,
Okay, we'll take that separately. Thank you. Take one separately. Councillor Hapata.
I was also not present for the meeting on the 1st of August, so I need to abstain myself from that meeting.
Okay,
Sorry.
no, that's fine. Well, therefore, I will take them all separately. Is that going to be a problem? Okay. Yep, that's absolutely fair enough. We're ready for a vote? Okay, we're going to take a vote on which is item 8 in our order paper, the minutes of the 10th of May. Invite a vote. That's passed. 10 votes for and 2 against. Oh, 2 abstentions, sorry. 10 votes for and 2 abstentions. That moves us on to item 9, which is the minutes of the 7th of June. Part 1, public extraordinary, and invite a vote. And that's passed, 12 votes for and none against. That moves us to item 10, which is the minutes of the 1st of August. Part 1, public extraordinary, to be confirmed. And invite a vote. And that's passed, 10 votes for and 2 abstentions. Thank you. That moves us on to item 10, which is drinking water compliance, and invite Mike Monaghan to present, who is the group manager for Three Waters.
So tēnā koutou katoa, ko Mike Monan aho. Good morning, Mr. Chair and councillors. I've got Ricky Freemantle with me this morning. He's our activity managers in the Three Waters space. I'd like to take the paper as read. However, I'd also like to highlight a slight change in the detail in section 3.5. Since the paper was submitted, officers have met with Taumata Arawai, the national regulator, to discuss the chlorine exemption application, which is highlighted in the paper. And the advice we've received from Taumata Arawai is that because PNCC are already chlorinating all our supplies, that's not the appropriate mechanism. Instead, TA recommend that council apply for an enforceable undertaking under subpart 5 of the Water Services Bill. An enforceable undertaking is a written binding commitment to implement agreed actions to address the matters contravening the Act. So in this case, that would be committing to resolving the issues of contact time at our bore sites. I'm happy to take the paper as read, and we'll answer some questions if you have any.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to open it up to members for questions. Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Mike, and welcome, Ricky. Just, Mike, do we have any estimate of the number of properties that are affected by the non-insufficient residence time, I guess is how you'd phrase it?
It's less about the number of properties affected and more about the number of our source water sites. So, for example, a couple of our bore sites where we need to have contact time to address this issue is what we've been looking at. Council will be aware that the Turitea supply supplies 60% of the water to the city, and the bores make up the excess within the city. So it's it's that water from the bores that are blending into the city supply where we need to address it at the source. So the issue, the drinking water standards, without getting too detailed here, the drinking water standards or the quality assurance rules are now, they cover source water, they cover treatment, and they cover distribution.
So is it the regulator's view that because of the status of those bores, actually all properties are receiving non-compliant water at this stage?
I don't believe so, no.
And I guess to come back to it then in terms of what I'm trying to understand is what proportion of properties in the city then are receiving water that isn't technically compliant?
Okay, I'll probably need to come at that from a different perspective, and I think we've said that 90% of the water in the city is compliant. That's our estimate.
And that's not 90% spatially in terms of 90% of the property. That's out of each tap. 9 drops are compliant and the 10th drop isn't.
Okay, maybe I might have to re-examine and take that question offline, but we can sort of have a deeper dive into that. And things like the villages, the Bunnythorpe and the Ashurst, they're not part of the town zone, and they're 100% compliant with these new standards. It's the water from our city bore sites where we don't have this contact. We don't have contact reservoirs. That's the issue here.
Great, thank you. Can I ask around the kind of forward look in terms of reservoirs versus UV kind of solutions? Obviously early days in terms of considering that, but can you give us any kind of general context around, I guess, helping to set our thinking about the differentiation between those options, strengths and weaknesses?
Yeah, we're definitely going to come back with a study on that, but our early thinking is it's a question of resilience. So the minimal viable product would be UV because that would get us compliant, but it doesn't answer the question of resilience. So if there was an incident in the city, some of our bore sites would benefit from having a resilient supply, having some water storage. But as a minimal viable product to meet these standards, UV would be the easiest way to get there.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to go online to a question from Councillor Hancock. Wait, we just can't hear you just at the minute. Councillor Hancock, we just can't hear you. We'll just work something out. Is it our end or his? Maybe just speak again. Councillor Hancock, we just might come back to you. We'll just work out the technicalities here. I'll come back to you. Councillor Zebulon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Mike. I was interested in the alternative pathway that you were outlining because the exemption is not appropriate. I noted the exemption has a maximum of 5 years, so I understood that if we were granted an exemption, we'd have 5 years or so to undertake this upgrade compliance work. Is there any kind of time frame that's associated with the alternative pathway, or is it a ASAP?
No, it would be in agreement with Taumata Arawai. We set out a plan we'd work in conjunction with them and they'd agree to that plan.
Okay, excellent. Thanks very much.
Councillor Arnott?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A few questions, please. Page 63, note 2.9b. To be effective, chlorine requires time to neutralise bacteria, which is known as contact time. How long is that time, please?
It's a CT value of 15. Now, there's a bit of an equation behind that. And 15 is the amount of dose versus time gets you this value of a ratio called CT15. In the old sort of standards, everybody used to say a 30-minute contact time. So you'd need enough volume of storage for the amount of chlorine you was adding to give you this 30 minutes of storage time, which would typically give you this CT value of 15. But each site's based on its flow and its capacity. So it's,
Great, thank you. Page 64, figure 1 shows Roberts Line bore. Would there be a possibility of building a reservoir behind the supermarket and piping that a short distance? Is that the sort of position you're looking for that, or?
Well, I mean, if you want my opinion, I would suggest that there's probably a bit of work to do before we could say where we could have land to build reservoirs. Roberts Line bore could be one of those instances where we say UV is a better option because you don't need the space and the land. So we may end up with a blended approach from our study. We may find that resilience reservoirs in some zones are the way to go, and in other areas it might be UV. For example, the Railway Road bore, which is just about online now, that could be the resilience piece for the Kelvin Grove zone. So we may be better looking at UV for the likes of that Roberts Line station, but we haven't got to that conclusion yet. That's just our early thoughts.
Process, thank you. With the Papio Park bore shut down, would I be correct in assuming the tap offering citizens flow-free water, but chlorinate instead, is also not going at the moment?
No, that's incorrect. So Papio Park has a site that has 3 separate bores, and the only bore that we're talking about in this report is the very old bore, which the headworks are still below ground. And we've got plans this year. The designs are almost complete now, just to do some minor capital works and bring that headworks above ground, and then that bore will be back online. But bore 2 will still be providing that unfluoridated water to that tap.
Very good. I didn't know there was 3 sitting there. With the 2 bores shut down in predicted summer with record temperatures and dry conditions, do you think this could put our city in a precarious position with potentially more demand than we can supply and heavy restrictions added?
That's a really good question, Councillor. One of the bores that we've brought offline is in the Roberts Line site for the Kelvin Grove area, and we've just brought our new Railway Road bore online, so that will certainly alleviate that concern. The bore at Papio Park will be supplemented from excess production at our Takara bore whilst we're doing these headworks, so we don't believe it's going to be an issue.
Right, very good. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to have another attempt. Councillor Hancock, can we call you back in to see if we can solve the issue? We still can't hear you, and we'll just play around here if you can keep doing the alphabet or something. That's true. Councillor Hancock, one of the suggestions have been maybe if you just type your question maybe in the interim. It's a bit unfortunate we can't hear you. Yeah, William, we can't hear you either. Do you want to take yourself off mute, Councillor Wood, and just say something? It's our end. Can I understand, Councillor Hancock, was he going to look to write his question, or I can't see him to get a response? Perhaps I'll just ask a question. Thanks, Mike. With the budgets that are in the table 1, that doesn't include any land acquisitions, does it? The 1.3 million. That's just
correct. The 1.3 million is for the work that's in progress now, and that's to get the sanitary state of the bores all to that class 1.
And do we have any provision in our current long-term planning budgets for land acquisition, or
not in the current plan, but the plan that we're proposing
Right, we'll have those.
we'll have that
envelopes.
provision in, yeah.
Great, thanks. Sorry, members. We'll work through this. Okay, we understand you'll take the question offline. Sorry, Councillor Hancock. We'll endeavour to continue to work around that technical issue, but no further questions. Oh, sorry, Councillor Barrett, you wanted a question or have you got a comment? Question? Floor's yours.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, for the chance to come back in. Just one further question, Mike, around the path forward. Sounds like there's two types of agreements or mechanisms that would kind of put us on a 5-year timeline or less. The report doesn't speak to any kind of ongoing monitoring or reporting coming through to council. I guess what's officers' views around what sort of tempo of kind of feeding back into committee would be useful as we kind of monitor that project over the 5 years?
Yeah, well, we're more than happy to bring the results of our investigations back to council to set that tempo, if that's kind of what's useful.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. No further questions. Thank you both gentlemen for presenting this report. Oh, you did have a question. Sorry. Come back, Mike. Can I call you back? The Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Apologies for lateness, just in Wellington early this morning. Mike, just reading this, where do we sit in this? Sorry, forgive me if this has already been asked. Where do we sit nationally in terms of all of this? Because you talk in generics there around other councils and that. I hope we're not a Queenstown, and clearly we're not, but, you know, and maybe that's where the bar is being set to bring everybody up, I don't know. Where would we sit in the scheme of this? Because there is a few questions floating around that maybe we're not great, and just would like to get some context around that.
I think that's a difficult question to answer, Mr. Mayor. You know, there's not kind of a league table, but what I think the point that's important to note here is that from a risks perspective, things haven't deteriorated for us. In fact, things have got better. It's the bar that's moved rather than the quality of the water that we're producing as a city. You know, the risk is no worse than it was in November when we was working under the old scheme. It's just under the new scheme, things have moved, and we need to raise the bar to get to that new level.
But would it be fair to say we're in the top quartile of councils with potable fresh drinking water?
I'd say that's a fair comment.
Good, thank you.
Great, thank you. No further questions this time. Thank you both, gentlemen. I'm happy to move the recommendations before us, that the committee receives a memorandum on the bacteriological compliance status of the city bore supplies to provide clarification on issues and strategies to address, presented to the Strategy and Finance Committee 20th of September 23, seconded by Councillor Naylor. Open it up for any comments or debate. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to officers for the work in preparing the report and the ongoing work engaging with the regulator and ensuring that we do get both an agreement in place and a work plan in place. And personally, I think it would behoove us as council and be a benefit to the committee to see some regular reporting on the progress of that plan. We know from watching the kind of long journeys that it's taken to bring some of the bores online, et cetera, that there is often some challenges along the path, so it'd be useful to understand progress and have a monitoring view across that. I think, you know, we can be confident and are fortunate as a city that there has been a long heritage of investment around water infrastructure and around the provision of safe drinking water. So this is really about probably taking it from a gold standard to a platinum standard. So, you know, it's really good to see that we're in a strong position already and just looking to consolidate that in the years ahead.
Thank you. The Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I just wanted to comment on a little bit like the same lines as Councillor Barrett. I mean, the bar has been raised here. There has been a real effort from officers. I'd hate to think that we're painting this as we've slipped. It's actually the bar has been risen, right? If you go to 3.4, we were 100% compliant. And in the New Zealand Water Conference, I got the phone call, be ready for the top water in the country, you know, and we, you know, we're always in that top couple of New Zealand. So Mike's too modest, he didn't want to say that, but let's be honest, we are. Yes, we've got new drinking water quality assurance rules and standards. We just have to accept that, whether you believe in them or not. I think it's a good thing. You know, just talking to some of my colleagues in Wellington at the LGNZ function, you know, they're all suffering some quite challenging things that we don't have, you know, and this is around fresh water, including some almost cities like Queenstown. But we're not in that category, you know, we are, and we're going to be lifting this, and I'd have to say that the money that's being talked about around the $3 million, yes, it's another $3 million, but water's pretty important to life and to a city's well-being. So I think we will need to do this over time. Just want to thank Mike and the team because you know, they do a fantastic job in that water space. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very much along the same lines as the Mayor. I can remember recently reading a report where in a national competition with drinking water across the nation, we were third, and the two towns that beat us were very small towns and were both spring-fed water supplies. So I think we're doing very well.
No further comments. Thank you. I'll now like to invite a vote. That's passed unanimously, 13 votes for, none against. That moves us to item 12, and I'd like to invite Peter Ridge, our Senior Policy Analyst, to the table to present the draft water supply bylaw deliberations on submissions report. Just press the right-hand side for the...
Kia ora koutou. I'm happy to take this report as read. It provides a summary of the issues that were raised by submitters through the written and oral submissions and provides our analysis of those issues with recommendations for change. Attachment 1 gives a breakdown of the comments in relation to the changes that we consulted on, but there were other issues that submitters raised which we've addressed as well. So we're recommending the adoption of the water supply bylaw and the administration manual with a few changes. We can take questions about specific changes, but in summary, the changes relate to the wording of clause 2.2, which describes the purpose of the bylaw, and there are some minor technical amendments relating to water meters. If the council approves the recommended changes and adopts the bylaw, then it will come into force on 1 February next year. Happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you. I'll open it up and perhaps lead with one question, just in regards to the a change or widening the tangata whenua in the original report and through the submitter submission promoting the extension of that. Have Rangatane given any additional thoughts to widening that scope?
I might invite Todd Taipu, if that's okay.
Certainly.
The answer is yes. The alignment of those statements reflects the approach that Rangitane have primarily represented to the council, which is issues within their rohe they take leadership on, but there's certainly a recognition that in matters related to water quality, especially when we know there are significant downstream flows of contaminants, for example, from Palmerston North into Te Awa Manawatu, that there are interests and impacts on iwi, certainly downstream of the city, and there are a number of arrangements, including, of course, with the wider waste water scheme review, with our formal agreements with Hapuaniwi downstream in terms of recognising and creating a space for them to represent the impacts and to have an involvement. And this is really about aligning, I guess, more our sort of staple procedures with acknowledging that activities and effects from the city that impact water do have downstream effects. So then the issue is just more about how to represent that, and as the councillors will see, we've utilised language or that was expressed in the submissions that seem very reasonable and clear, and we believe don't impact the mana of Rangitane, but also just acknowledge with the language that we hope encourages and supports engagement with wider regional iwi, and doesn't either through sort of actuality or through impression and tone appear to close doors when we clearly do and are open to understanding those impacts and wanting to minimise them as much as possible. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you for that answer.
Kia ora, gentlemen. Can you hear us online now?
Yes, I can.
Ah, perfect. Okay, we're just going to have a quick, was it a 10-minute break we were having? 15-minute break, and we'll be back soon. Okay, so it was just a matter of leaving and re-entering. We'll see you soon.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, bye.
Can you hear us as well?
Oh, sorry, William, can you speak?
Can you hear us now as well?
I can't hear you. Can you try
Okay.
trying leaving and entering again?
I can hear you, William.
You can hear William. Oh dear.
Yep.
Okay.
I'll come back.
Oh, I can hear you now, William. Okay.
All right.
Kia ora koutou, we'll now reconvene. Can I just thank you for your patience, and we are going to revert back. We're not going to do those tranche of leases right now. We're going to go back to the original order of our paper, and that will mean that we'll go to item 13. And I invite Peter Ridge, our Senior Policy Analyst, to come and present the draft speed management plan for 24 to 27. Approval for consultation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have with me Charlotte French and Becky Young from GHD. They've been working with us on the development of the proposal, so I just have them along in case there's any technical questions to help with. So I thought it might be useful just to have a brief recap of how we got to this point. So the government introduced a new setting of speed limits rule last year, which requires us to adopt a speed management plan by 30 June next year. This is going to be a recurring thing, something that we have to adopt every 3 years. Earlier this year, we proposed an interim speed management plan which relates to school speed limits. That's a separate process. That consultation has been underway, and we'll have a report coming to the committee next month. But this is relating to a separate package of speed limit proposals. So the SMP, the Speed Management Plan, sets out our approach to speed limits for the next 10 years, but it details speed limit changes that we want to make in the next 3 years. If we don't include them in the Speed Management Plan, it severely limits our ability to make any speed limit changes over those 3-year periods. The scope of change that we're proposing is relatively modest. We presented the draft scope earlier this year for endorsement. The changes include a lower speed limit for the city centre, which is bounded by the inner ring road and includes Broadway Ave. There are 4 what we've dubbed high-risk road areas, which includes Milsom Line, between Flyger's Line and Richardson's Line, Summerhill Drive, Kutarawa Road and Turatia Road. And there are 2 intersection speed zones we're proposing, ISZs, the first one being on number 1 line and Longburn-Rongatia Road, and the second one being for Valley View's Turatia Road. And then finally, there are some roads which currently have a 70k speed limit. One of the requirements under the new rule is that any roads that have a 70 or a 90 km/h speed limit have to be reviewed, and either a new speed limit proposed, or if the existing speed limit is to be retained, a reason why. We've identified 3 roads where we're proposing a change. That's for a section of Kelvin Grove Road between McLeavy Drive and James Line, Te Wanaka Road, which is in relation to the Kikawhenua development, and there's a technical change for Gillespie's Line, where we've identified that the speed limit is currently showing as 70, even though the posted speed limit signs are different. We did some initial stakeholder engagement on the draft scope. So there's a summary in the report, attachment 1, I believe, which sets out the groups that we engaged with and a summary of their views. Wherever possible, we've taken those views into account in the development of the proposals. So our recommendation is that the draft speed management plan is approved for public consultation. This will allow us to get that formal feedback on the proposals from the stakeholders and the general public, and it will allow us to meet the statutory deadline set by Whakatahi. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. I might start with the first one before we go to members. In regards to the Te Wanaka Road reduction being proposed, can I understand around the relationship with the intersection at Pioneer Highway with Waka Kotahi, the time frame that, excuse me, their openness to consider the intersection speed zone, but also the time frame that might happen, understanding that's holding up the Kikawhenua being able to fully develop?
Yeah, so the discussions we've had with Whakatahi have been quite productive. For them to implement the intersection speed zone on State Highway 56, they need to include it in their speed management plan. So they're operating on the same time frame as us. They've given us a verbal indication that they will take that into their speed management plan. So our proposal around Te Wanaka Road should happen in the same time frame. The the implementation of that speed limit change, there is a degree of discretion. So we've indicated in the speed management plan that it would be contingent on Whakatahi bringing the intersection speed zone online. But obviously it's subject to their own timeframes, and we're working as closely as we can with them on that matter.
Can I also just come back to the eastern end of the city with Roberts Line intersecting on Napier Road? Can I understand, is there anything we can do to advance that with this piece of work to have that intersection more appropriate, or the speeds that intersect through that intersection?
I'll hand one over to Charlotte French. She may have some information to add on that one.
So just to make sure I've got the correct location understanding, this is the intersection that Whakatahi recently changed the speed limit nearby on the State Highway. I believe it went down to 80 if formerly. It was a temporary speed limit through Roberts Line, and that they formalised that to 80, and they included a couple of other things. My understanding, and I will just caveat this, that this is just my knowledge up to probably June this year. It may have changed recently. They did have some plans to upgrade that intersection that currently just working through obtaining funding and approvals internally. I can't probably offer any more insight. Whakatahi will have more of that information internally. In terms of the speed limit change, the State Highway controls those speed limits on the State Highway. We can always encourage and request changes, as we have done for that intersection speed zone, so we can take that feedback back and maybe discuss that further. My understanding historically of why that section is 80 k's is just due to the environment surrounding Roberts Line being still quite rural, and there was very strong feedback given internally that both from the public, from stakeholders, and even from technical staff, that it does need to reduce, but would require the infrastructure change to be able to encourage that speed change on the State Highway. With regards to the local speed, that one is certainly the minor issue. It's certainly the State Highway which is creating a safety issue on that road. So similar situation, it's going to be a combined discussion. Speed limits can't change between State Highway First local roads. They have to go together. So as Peter said, it's an ongoing discussion. And yeah.
Great, thank you for that full response. The Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Peter and team. You said you've consulted quite widely. I don't see the affected areas. Did you talk to anybody within some of these areas where you're dropping the speed quite considerably?
So the stakeholder groups that we had some engagement with, we presented the full scope of the proposals. So in regards to...
And that's not the scope, it's just the group. So you've done the normal AA, Horizons, Living Streets, but where's the Te Wanaka Road people? Where's the Kelvin Grove Road people? Have they been done as well?
No, so we haven't engaged formally with any resident groups.
Why not?
Because that's what we're asking to do now, is to go through the formal consultation process.
Okay, all right. Cool. So in terms of Road Transport Forum, so we've got all the one side, but we haven't got the people that earn a living via transport.
So we engaged with Transporting NZ.
Yeah, they're quite different to the Road Transport Forum.
In what way? Sorry.
Well, they're an umbrella organisation. Do you not understand?
So I understand Transporting NZ represents a number of...
It's like going to LGNZ, you know, they don't necessarily represent us.
So we spoke with Billy Clemens, who contacted the members that he represents in Palmerston North. They represent a number of transport firms, and they were able to give us some feedback on the proposals that we sent out. And
what was the feedback?
Generally, they were, the areas they expressed concern with were the city centre, in the sense that the light industrial areas could possibly pose an issue for them. And the other issue they identified, I believe, was Milson Line.
Yeah.
In terms of a freight route.
So you're looking for feedback from those people now, eh? Is that the whole idea?
If this is approved, then it goes out for formal consultation.
Yeah.
And we're looking for feedback from a wide range of people.
Right, okay, cool. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councillor Hapata.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Peter. I just want to know on point 5, you talk about going out for public consultation. Just want to know, what is your consultation plan? If you could outline that plan for us.
Sure. So we're taking a similar approach to the way we approached it for the school speed limits changes. So our consultation document will be available through our customer service centre, the libraries. It will be available on our website, and we'll be promoting that through our social media channels as well, and through digital and print signage. We have a number of stakeholders identified, which we will be contacting directly, and providing an opportunity to meet with them to discuss any particular issues they want to raise with us. We're also planning to run some drop-in sessions, which will be promoted as widely as possible, so that people can come and discuss the proposals, ask questions, and provide feedback as well.
So, as the Mayor outlined, what about the residents that don't necessarily, aren't the stakeholders? So how do they
we'll also
engage?
We'll also be doing letters that'll be dropped to anybody in those affected areas, so they are included. There's about 1,100 that we've identified.
And all of the ones that are getting reduced speeds, like the businesses as well?
Yes, correct, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Peter and colleagues, for the report. A few questions here. One around city centre. I see the implementation timeframes indicated to sit over 3 years. Just wondered why.
So at the moment, it is still very early days, and we have taken it over 3 years because we know there are a lot of complexities with engagement and appropriate, getting the designs correct. We want to get the CBD correct. We want to get it right. So we've opened ourselves to the 3-year period of it happening. It will be able to be refined once we have a better idea of what the final proposal will be. It's one of those things that there's a lot of variables to consider when you're dealing with such a dense environment. You've got multiple civil infrastructure elements to consider compared to some potentially more simpler installations, such as the more rural areas where there's less to consider. So we have opened ourselves up to 3 years just at this point, especially while we're still trying to figure out exactly what the CBD looks like. The 3-year the plan is essentially a 3-year plan, so we've opened it up fully to give us that flexibility, and then once we have a more refined understanding of what this will look like, we'll be able to hone in and potentially give a much more detailed program so that people will know when these changes will happen.
Thank you. So is the view to potentially have different parts of the city centre go to 30 Ks at different times, or is it to actually have a kind of a single date where the whole...
Best practice would be to have a single date, but we are open to those changes and those programming needs as best that fits the community and their desires. Because the city is quite a defined area, it would make the most sense from a technical perspective to change it all at the same time. But we have flexibility in that, so open to feedback, and certainly open to the feedback from the community in that regard.
Great, thank you. Next area of questions was around the neighbourhood speed zones. Looks at that's been considered but set aside in terms of anything more than investigation at this stage. Just wanted to know what level of evidence is needed before actually implementing a neighbourhood speed zone?
That's a good question. Probably the key thing we wanted to do was more engagement. The time that we had didn't allow us to go into detail with particular locations. So there were 3 that were identified, and when we met with Aura Connect, for instance, they were curious to see what kind of engagement we might do in those locations before making a proposal. And there wasn't enough time in the space that we had to do that engagement, so probably that would be a key thing there as well. It would also be useful to look at the evidence more closely from some other cities where they've implemented it and just get some more data. So the idea that we had originally presented back in April, I believe, it was still a very early idea. I think what we're looking for here is more time to develop that idea.
Thanks. So is the nature of the investigation that's signaled here going to be that kind of interactive with potential locations so that we get to a concrete decision point, or is it going to be more of a desktop type approach?
I would see it more as a interactive engagement process. So we'd be working with those communities and having some more detailed discussions. I think the idea of aligning it potentially with the play streets concept is a good model here. So it's not something we go out necessarily with a fully formed idea. We go out and we have some engagement around what that might look like and explore those ideas a bit more.
Is there, I guess, given the challenges that you faced around time frame, is there any way that, say in year 2 or year 3, there could be a generic signal around a neighborhood speed zone that could be built into this plan, consulted on with the community to be clarified through that investigation process so that we don't have to wait a full 3 years before we have a chance at actually having a crack at it?
So the design of a speed management plan, it does limit us somewhat. The 3 years is I guess, an implementation timeframe. The ability to have discussions with the community is not limited within those 3 years. We can certainly do that interactive investigation over those 3 years behind the scenes, but in terms of a formal plan being developed, the next available opportunity will be closer to 2027 because that is the plan cycles. So it would just be a matter of over the next 3 years, those discussions could be had, but it just needs to be made very clear to the neighbourhoods having those discussions that they won't see any change on their roads until 2027. That essentially does give us 3 years to have these investigatory talks, which I think is a good period of time. You'll be able to see some of potentially the changes from the schools, should they get approved, to trickle through, and understanding and education will change, particularly as there are other cities around the country, such as Christchurch and Wellington, which have actually included neighbourhoods to date, and as Peter said, there'll be more data to support. So those conversations can still happen, there's nothing legally stopping that, but in terms of a formalised plan and going through this process, yeah, that won't be able to be started until 27 at the earliest.
All right, thank you. Next area question was just around compliance. You indicated quite a few times in the report around kind of infrastructure being the way that's intended to get the road environment consistent with the limit. What consideration's been given around uses of speed cameras and other enforcement options in addition to the infrastructure changes?
So one of the changes with the new speed limits rule is around how speed cameras, or safety cameras as they call them, will be managed. So that's moving from New Zealand Police to Waka Kotahi as the managing authority. There hasn't been any information I'm aware in detail around how that's going to look and when it's going to come into effect, but there has been some indications of new form of technology for these safety cameras and in vaster numbers around the country that would change that compliance element there. So don't have any specific details to offer at this point, but it's an area that we'll be monitoring. It's likely, I think we would see some more information early next year from Waka Kotahi around that, but it won't be in time for this plan. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Finally, Mr. Chair, just wanted to ask around the consultation document itself. Is there a reason why the maps don't have any street names on them?
It's an early draft in order to make it in time for the agenda. The final version we've got all those issues addressed. We're working through them in terms of edit and design.
So the actual maps
Yes.
will have street names
Yes.
associated with them.
Definitely.
Glad to hear it. And just on that as well, there's an indication around putting the advertising of it through the Guardian, and just wondered if I'd read that correctly and kind of why the view was one newspaper over another and not both.
We always advertise in both the Manawatu Standard and the Guardian. We include the Guardian because it's a free paper, so it provides another opportunity for people to access the information.
Great, but just to clarify, it will be in both?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We have a question online from Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Thank you, Peter. I just had a question on page 155 regarding the Milson line changes. I've never really understood why that speed drops from 100 to 80 so far out of the town, unless it was to drop the speed for that intersection with Richardson's line. And so I just wanted to get an understanding of, now we're going to reduce the speed at that intersection with Richardson's line to 60, whether the 80 kilometre section needs to remain at 80, or if that could revert back to 100, or if there was another reason for that speed being 80. If that makes sense.
That'll be a question for Charlotte.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just trying to wrap my head around precisely. So you're talking about we've got a 60k section proposed and we have 80k existing. Yes, okay, so we're asking now. So that section of 80 there, as it is existing, we did look at potentially extending it out to 60, just the nature of the environment, to try and stop those repetitive changes, etc. This was a bit of a rock and a hard place solution. There wasn't really any perfect solution that we could achieve without major expenditure, and that's unfortunately just not in scope for this project. So this is very much a lesser of many evils solution. The 80k as it is existing, we wouldn't be in a place to increase it to 100. That would not be appropriate from a safety perspective. Reducing it to 60 was also not going to be appropriate given the operating speeds in that area were clearly showing people were comfortable driving at those 80k speeds, and lowering it to 60 without infrastructure or land use change would definitely create some discomfort for drivers, and we certainly didn't want to do that. The 60 outside has been proposed. We did look at a 50 extension, but for similar reasons of why that 80 couldn't go down to 60. The environment just didn't match a 50 environment and would have been rather frustrating for drivers, and we certainly didn't want to make things worse and have non-compliance. So yeah, the solution we've proposed is something that we will certainly be monitoring in terms of how people behave and whether or not it actually works. It is very much a situation of a 70 that has made things rather difficult in terms of finding that sweet spot of a solution. So I hope that answered your question. It was a tricky one.
No, that does very well. And I share your concern that it'll go from 50 to 60 to 80 to 100 all within sort of a kilometre. When you say there's safety reasons we can't increase that 80 section to 100, what are those safety concerns?
So generally, if we're looking at an 80 increasing to 100, we would typically be needing to look at improving the infrastructure. We know that an 80k environment is the most safe and appropriate speed for where we have the risk of head-on collision, i.e. there's no median separation. Now, because we can't go ahead and change all 100k roads to 80k's, that's certainly not what we're going to do anytime soon. But this particular road, seeing as it's already at 80k's, if we increased it to 100, we would then have to justify to Wakatahi what infrastructure change we are making to make 100k suitable, which in this case, we're not going to put median barrier down there. So that's the reason why.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. Another question. So in this consultation, what I guess allowance would there be? I appreciate the Wakatahi is encouraging us to lower speed limits, but for changes that we've made, such as, for example, between Massey and Linton, where we've lowered it to 80, would this consultation include somebody who had a view that we should increase that speed back to 100, or is this purely about reductions in limits?
I think that's partly answered by the answer that Charlotte gave before, is increasing speed limits to 100 would require us to justify the safety improvements that are being made to that corridor. So I think if there were submissions that came forward that suggested we should raise it to 100, then it would require a different investigation than what we've put forward here, which, as Charles said, is not currently in scope.
Okay, thank you. And my last question was just around responsiveness, because you've been talking about, more or less, if we're going to do anything in the next 3 years, we have to do it now. What happens if we have a major accident on an intersection that's currently 100 and the community comes to us and wants us to reduce it to 80, for example? Would we have any mechanism for responding to that need other than saying, no, that's all right, we'll deal with it in 3 years?
No, absolutely. We can make responsive changes. The mechanisms are slightly different. We can make changes with the approval of the Director of Land Transport, Wakatahi. But we would be doing those in extraordinary circumstances, like you indicate there with a serious accident, or if they're relatively minor changes. But if you want to make significant changes, that's largely out of scope between the 3 years.
Great. Thank you, Peter and team. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was wondering how many councils around the country have said thanks, but no thanks. We'll keep the status quo.
I don't have that number.
Okay.
But Charlotte may have some information.
I can only offer insight. I don't have specific data. So I work with a number of councils around the country doing these developments for them. Every council has been quite different. It has come down to both local, opinion and also resource available to make the changes. Christchurch, for example, has gone quite hard, but they've been making speed changes for a number of years already. So a lot of that early work and laying down the path, I could say, has been done previously. There are some other smaller councils, more rural ones, with more challenges on their roads, which have gone for a very much bare minimum approach. There is an expectation for councils to have a speed management plan that is required by law. The content of that speed management plan, the only legal requirements is to have schools done, which of course has been addressed in the previous plan that we've submitted, and then to have the 70s and 90s, as Peter indicated. Everything else is purely by selection of the council and of staff to consider what is right for their city. Some councils have very much gone bare bones, and that's mostly due to resource availability. So it is a real mixed bag. But I would say that the themes have been schools, obviously, CBDs, and township neighbourhood areas and high-risk roads. Those seem to be the themes coming through for a lot of councils. Many councils are leaving their more challenging roads, their more challenging conversations for future plans, because they just don't want to tackle those at the moment.
Where does our plan sit in the scheme of bare bones?
I would say it is, if you went 5 as a middle ground, I'd say you're sitting in the 4 range, 0 being bare bones and 10 being absolutely everything. If you had included neighbourhoods, I would have put that more at the 6 range. So you've gone with what I would say the CBD being certainly a area that's beyond bare bones, but with your schools already captured and your 70s are required legislative and a couple of high-risk roads. So I'd say you're sitting in the middle ground pretty comfortably compared to others.
Thank you, appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. The Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just jump back in again. Summerhill Drive, going down to 50 k's, yet it acts as a, and I can understand why you're doing that, to try and urbanise it, but it's still acting as a state highway by default. You're shaking your head, but I live up there and I can tell you now, we'll go and do a test how many B trains are coming down it. What is the view there? Because it carries so much state highway traffic by default, because we've got the transport agency fixing the road up at the saddle.
Yeah, Summerhill Drive is quite a challenging route. The reason I was shaking my head is it connects to the state highway, so you're right in one sense. It is acting a bit like a state highway, but it also services the urban environment out there in terms of Okatiri and Ruapehu Drive. So it's got somewhat has a foot in both camps, I guess. And I think that's why the proposal is a bit challenging to strike that balance. It could be left at 60 kilometres per hour. By no means is that unreasonable. I think the reason why we've proposed a 50k speed limit, notwithstanding the state highway function, is the number of crashes on that road. It's the fact that there's a planned cycleway in that area. I think that points to a shift in the in kind of the character of that stretch of the road there. So if the decision was to keep it at 60, I think that is reasonable. but I think 50 is also worth exploring and proposing out for submissions.
You know, it was 80 not that long ago.
So the previous speed limits bylaw, we reduced it from 70 to 60. And
it was 80 before that.
Quite some time, yeah.
Okay. I'll wait for comment, thank you.
Can I just follow through again, having a second go equally? So with a 3-year time frame, are we looking, for example, around the development at Kiki Whenua, that they'll still be limited to just developing 30 lots until this change gets approved in 3 years, or gets formalised in 3 years' time?
So, as I mentioned before, the timing is something relatively fluid because it relates to both the work that Wakatahi will do on the state highway. The expectation, I believe, is that if Wakatahi implement the intersection speed zone that they've indicated that they would in that first year, then that would enable the development at Kiki Whenua to be unlocked. David Murphy may have some other information to add to that.
Morena koutou, David Murphy, Chief Planning Officer. So through you, Mr. Chair, the submission may well have been received while you're on a leave of absence, but there was a submission that the council approved on the Waka Kotahi initiated initiated a special review of the speed limit of State Highway 56. So the council submission has been lodged with Waka Kotahi. It seeks a 60 km/h speed limit for that part of Pioneer Highway or State Highway 56 to support the development of the Kiki Whenua area and also looking ahead to the broader Kaka Tangiata development. The submission also includes that if Waka Kotahi are not prepared to drop the speed limit to 60, that there is some an 80 km/h speed limit with some conditions, which include an intersection speed zone and some commitment from Waka Kotahi that in doing that they will support the development of the Kiki Whenua area. So really what we've said to Waka Kotahi is drop it to 60 if you don't. I think the submission has been heard initially. So,
okay, thank you. There's no further questions. Thank you, Peter and team, for responding to the questions. Next step is I'm prepared to move the recommendations before us at the draft speed management plan 2024 to 27 as shown in attachment 1 be approved for public consultation. As seconded by Councillor Naylor. Open it up for any comments, debate. There being none, the Mayor, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, I thank the staff for doing this. I think elements of this are really sensible, really smart. We're the last of the metros to have a 30k CBD or central business district. So, and it's quite defined by the inner ring road. And let's be honest, you can't really go any faster within that area anyway. So, I'm fully on board with all of that. And look, all the others do. There is an element of evidence or good opinions on why they should come down. I would just challenge a little bit who we go and talk to. We haven't really talked to the sector that makes a living from transport. And yes, we've gone to I suppose an umbrella organisation, but we've gone to a lot of other organisations that have an interest in it. But, you know, where's Infrastructure New Zealand? Where's the Road Transport Forum? They should be there as well. So that may have perhaps influenced some of this as well, because there is a bit of challenge on some of these roads, Milson Line, Summerhill Drive. But I can also see the evidence of why they want to drop it. But as we've become such an unproductive country, and somewhat it will harm the region if we just drop everything down to the lowest possible common one-size-fits-all denominator. So I just balance that as well. And yeah, look, I think the public and the businesses will tell us where they want to go with this. So thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps I'll just add my line of questioning into comment in regards to the importance of actually unlocking some of the residential development opportunities for Palmerston North, and that we're looking for the update with Waka Kotahi to pick up, particularly around that Te Wanaka Road intersection with the state highway, to lower the speeds to enable the full unlocking of that subdivision, and the importance of that. So if that's not approved, I think that's quite a critical thing, that therefore thereafter, if that happens to be the case, I think way more advocacy needs to be lifted in that space. No further comments. We'll now invite the vote. That is passed. 12 votes for, 1 against, and 1 abstention. That moves us to item 14, which is the Ashurst and Te Apiti campervan dump station budget, and invite Aaron Phillips, who's our activity manager for parks, to present this item.
Good morning again, Mr. Chair and councillors. A fairly good news story. We've managed to secure $100,000 from the Tourism Fund to support development of a new dump station in Ashurst. That will cover the balance of the costs that have been developed. A design's been completed and the engineer's cost has been completed on it. We've identified a likely site, but we'd like your permission to increase the budget and proceed to consulting the community on that proposal. Otherwise, I think I could probably take questions.
Great, I'll open it up if there are any questions. The Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, thanks, Aaron. So this is just purely camper vans. It's not stock trucks. It's just camper van only.
That is correct. It's designed in conjunction with the Motorhome Association to serve those vehicles.
Just knowing some of the transport issues that we've had, and you may not know them, your transport colleagues probably will, there is a real stock truck effluent issue, and it was causing some adverse behaviour. Are you aware of that? From stock? From
not
drivers?
in detail, no.
Okay. So there was no thoughts of, other officers didn't come and say, hey, why don't we do something together, or piggyback, because this is really costly to do this.
It is. The location across the road from residential housing, I'd suggest probably not a great spot for stock effluent.
Yeah.
As you saw in the criteria outlined in section 2.4, I think, of the report, we're attempting to serve that tourism market with the opening of the new highway, the Te Apiti master plan developments. And
No, I have no problem. No, you don't have to explain it. I've got no problems with what you're trying to do. I just thought if there was a bit of a discussion between officers, but obviously there hasn't been.
Yeah. No.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Aaron. Just a question too around location. The blue blob on the map there. Is the thinking to open up another access to Cambridge Ave, or to access it through the car park?
Access through the car park, so that any camper vans queuing to use the facility would be off the road and out of the way. They'd exit through a new access that would be created back onto the road at that point, so it'd be one way in, one way out, and we'd manage that appropriately with some engineering. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. No further questions. Oh, sorry. Come in. Stay there in the hot seat, Aaron. Councillor Hapeta.
Yeah, sorry to come in late. Just wondered what the demand was. Have we got any numbers on the demand?
No, I don't. Sorry, Councillor. It was a program that was put forward a number of years ago in consultation with the Motorhome Association to reach a camper van friendly status. One of my colleagues probably would have reeled some numbers off the top of his head, but I don't have those.
Can you come back to us with that?
Sure.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Great. Thank you this time, Aaron. No further questions. Well done on attracting the additional revenue. I'm happy to move the recommendations before us that are on the screen, which are the same as in the order paper. I don't propose to read them out word for word. Seconded by Councillor Naylor. Open it up for any comments or debate. Mr. Mayor.
I think it's just, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's just worth acknowledging the officers. I mean, thank you, Aaron, for finding some extra budget. That would have to be one of the first pieces of government funding that we've actually secured, so well done. Also, I think in, again, partnership with Bruce Lahore and the Motorhome and Caravan Association, that's a national organisation, but of course Bruce is a local, so he'll be very happy that that's going ahead. And I think Ashurst and that whole Te Apiti region is our one of our crown jewels, certainly in that biodiversity and natural tourism. So I think this is a good deal. Just probably a question for maybe the CE and other senior management is just understanding what NDC might be doing with the effluent, and that stock truck thing will not go away, and it is causing quite some unusual behaviour in where trucks go, because they get over the saddle, they need to release their effluent, and there's nothing here between here and Fielding. So it is something that needs to be done. Probably it's not our probably direct responsibility, but we should be talking to our neighbours a bit more fully on that. It'll help where all these trucks seem to go. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Now, put the vote. That's passed unanimously, 14 votes for. Invite you back, Aaron, to present the next report, which is the Ashurst Te Apiti 3 Bridges Loop Track Investigation Budget and Waka Kotahi Fund Update. Item 15.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I might take a quick liberty. Thank you for the thanks, but it shouldn't come to me. Councillors, officers, Hayley Sandinglands and Jason Poulton can prepare the application. I just got the joy of telling you that with the success, so none of the credit belongs to me for that. Yeah. A similar issue, Council, or in terms of the budgets, you might remember last year you gave us permission to apply to Waka Kotahi's Recreation Fund associated with the Te Hāhuaranga Highway for $551,000. It was quite a slow process. We popped that application in reasonably promptly, but there was some various iterations that were gone through. They came back to us and asked us to break that up into stages. They wanted the investigative works and some of the preliminary design works to occur before they committed to some of the development, if they will commit to some of the development funding. So that was done. We resubmitted the application, broken into stages, which they've advised that they'll fund $156,875 for some of that early design work and investigations. That needs to be allowed for in the budget, and if you give us your go-ahead, we'll then proceed to commissioning some of that design work.
Great. Open it up. Any questions? Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Aaron. Just on the Pembroke Street overbridge, I guess working with what we have in front of us and what you know, what's the earliest possible we could actually see the overbridge actually with the ribbon across it and ready to open?
I think just your mic, sorry, Aaron.
Apologies, councillors. That program is actually held within the active transport program, and I'd need to double check with a colleague, Michael Bridges, about where that sits in an overall budget. We decided it'd be good to get some of the preliminary investigation work done as part of this to understand the feasibility of the 3 loops. And I don't recall exactly what year the construction money was allowed for in that program. If you're happy, I'd come back to you.
That'd be great.
Councillors.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and apologies for late arrival. Thank you, Aaron, for the report. Just a quick question on phase 2 and 3 funding. So 1.4 of your report says Waka Kotahi will consider separate funding applications once phase 1 is done. What's your level of comfort that we'll get some funding towards this?
It's a little bit difficult to say, Councillor. They have a $1 million fund. It's being administered on a first in, first served basis. There's a number of other community groups and organisations applying to it, and particularly I believe colleagues in Tararua District. So it'll depend on how well our investigations go and how quickly we get back in the mix, and whether they think our particular projects are a priority. I'd like to think they would be a priority, but I'm speculating, given that it ties well with the Te Apiri Master Plan and the priorities that are outlined in that that document. But I'd be hesitant to give you a number.
But whoever pays for it, we're going to have to do the investigation and options analysis anyway, so
Yes.
great that we got that money at least. Thank you.
Thank you. There's no further questions, Aaron. Thank you for presenting this report. I would, again, like the previous item, just move the recommendations on the screen that are the same as in the order paper without reading word for word. Look for a seconder, Councillor Naylor. Thank you. Open it up for any comments or debate. Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just briefly, it is a mix of good news, but there is a touch of concern around it, in that we went through an application process with a sized application, and the background and the rationale around that entire fund was very much driven out of the community, especially around the Ashurst area during the notice of requirement process that led to the designation of the new roading corridor. So to see it get broken down into multi-phase does start to draw some concern, especially if there's the potential for others to basically jump the queue on us, given the genesis of that project was very much grassroots within the Ashurst community, both addressing concerns raised by the notice of requirement, as well as some of the long-standing opportunities there. So would wish the officers well in continued active pursuit of this opportunity, and it would be great to see it land here, and I would hate for Waka Kotahi to lose sight of the genesis of that fund and potentially see it delivered to a less targeted outcome.
Thank you, Councillor. I think that reflections I would also reflect without repeating it. Any other speakers? There have been none. I'd now like to invite the vote. That is passed unanimously, 14-4. Thank you. That moves us on to item 16, which I'd like to invite Sam Dowse, is that pronounced correctly? Senior Planner, and David Murphy, Chief Planning Officer, to present one of the longer titled reports, the Okautere Urban Growth Area, information relating to the description, timing and quantum of the development of infrastructure work programs to enable growth in Okautere. The floor is yours.
Morena koutou councillors. Just before I start, I'd like to introduce Sam Dowse, and as Vaughan just has as well. So many of you may have met Sam in some more informal settings. She's been with us for a wee while now, but this is her first time in the chamber. So following the departure of Michael Duindam, our principal planner, who was sort of driving PCG, Sam has picked up that work on behalf of the council, so, and doing a fab job. So I'm just going to talk briefly to the memo. I'll obviously take it as read. Appreciate there's some pretty big numbers in the back of the report, and emphasise that for the time being this is a for information report, so you're not being asked to approve or prioritise those budgets today. The reason we're bringing you this memo today is sort of the backstory to PCG. So as a result of changes to the National Policy Statement Urban Development, the government through that have signalled very strongly to councils that if you're planning for growth, you need to be funding the infrastructure to support growth. So the days of zoning land and kicking the can down the road to the LTP and working out how we're going to fund growth are gone. The NPSUD is very explicit about thinking that connection between how we're planning for growth and the infrastructure. And if we look at some of our greenfield areas at the moment, getting them online, some of the challenges is making sure that we've got the infrastructure funding and programming ready to go. So just as a little bit of backstory, you know, and it's in the memo, March 2022, we came to council and said we're finalising the PCG plan change. The indications are we're going to need to deal with some transport and stormwater infrastructure. PCG came to the council in June 2022 and was approved. There is a hearing scheduled for Plan Change G in December. All the evidence from council has recently gone out to the submitters and is available on the website. Part of that process will be demonstrating to the panel that determine PCG, which is you know, provides for another 1,000 homes at Aokautere and a whole lot of other outcomes in terms of the structure plan. We'll be demonstrating that the council is actively working towards thinking about the infrastructure that's required to service growth. So that's the genesis and driver for this report, is to be able to, I guess, flag and raise to the council and those officers who will be representing the council at PCG that we are working towards what we see at this stage as the infrastructure required to service PCG. So sorry, that was slightly longer than taken as read, but I just thought I'd emphasise that. One last thing, sorry. There will be views expressed at the hearing for PCG about whether or not these works are required, or whether some are required or some are not required. There will be submissions from the likes of Waka Kotahi, landowners and developers. Again, that prioritisation process as part of the LTP will be able to work alongside what we're seeing and hearing at the PCG hearing to make sure that our programs are matching what's coming out of there and providing the confidence to that panel that we're thinking about the infrastructure. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you. The Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, David. Thanks, Stacey. Couple of questions. This is nearly $70 million. Does this attract far rate? Well, I should say the roading part, does it attract the far rate?
Yes, so in the memo we're saying that we anticipate that these works will need to be funded through a combination of rates, development contributions and Waka Kotahi funding. The exact mixture or recipe of that funding will be the result of business cases that we do with Waka Kotahi, but we'll be certainly looking to obviously complete those and get as much support as we can from them. Certainly the work is indicating too that part of the driver for these intersection upgrades is they're also servicing the growth that's already happened in Aokautere. So, you know, it's developed over the last 20 or 30 years. So some of these safety and intersection upgrades are being driven by the growth that's already happened, and the extra 1,000 sections in a lot of cases is the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Yeah, you know it's 70,000 per section, if you do the math. That's right up there.
Yeah, that would be if those 1,000 sections were only paying for the 70 million. So, as I said, it will need to be funded through a combination of rates, Waka Kotahi funding and development contributions.
Yeah, but even, it doesn't matter how you skin it, some taxpayers are going to pay for it, someone's going to pay for it. Have officers thought about the affordability of being able to just plough on ahead with this? I didn't realise it was so costly. This is right up there.
Yeah, and I think it highlights the broader challenge that we're going to be facing as part of the LTP about the cost of growth.
Yeah.
And how we fund that. So, yeah, and that's why I emphasise that this is a for information report, and ultimately you prioritise your decision making around LTP programs as part of the LTP. So. Yeah.
And finally, Mr. Chair, some of these intersections are stating they need roundabouts or signals. And look, strongly agree with most of them. We've got Abbey Road and Johnston Drive onto Pacific Drive. They're very suburban, quiet streets. Where's that evidence to say we need traffic signals on those?
So that will be worked out through the detailed design phase, but we have at this stage included both options and taken the higher water cost.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So it's yet to be really worked out.
Yeah, and that I think highlights my point I made in the introductory comments, Mr. Mayor, was that the exact nature of these upgrades and the timing and what's required will be debated through the hearing. So I think this list can be viewed as a starting point. For instance, we've got submissions that range from full opposition to everything, including some submissions from Waka Kotahi along those lines. So yeah, funding of growth is going to be a challenge for the council going forward.
Yeah, and I'll leave it to comment, sorry.
Councillor Zebulon.
Thank you, Tēnā kōrua. First question from me. I saw in the appendix there is provision for cyclist facilities on the full length of Ruapehu Drive. Just, is that as sort of as an alternative route to the separated cycleway that's going up Summerhill Drive, or what's the rationale behind that provision as well?
I would have to come back to answer that in full, but the purpose of the cycleway routes is to encourage a mode shift, because at the moment we can see Kotiri residents are primarily using private motor vehicles to travel to the city, so the cyclist facilities are mitigation method proposed to encourage a shift in mode.
Excellent. Thank you. So I noted there was a suggestion or a proposal there for a signalised crossing at the intersection of Ruapehu Drive and Summerhill Drive. Is there any potential for backflow of traffic resulting from that might stretch sort of all the way to the bridge? I'm thinking worst case scenario if we put signals in there, peak traffic. What impact that has further downstream with traffic coming over the bridge and then up Summerhill? Short phasing, perhaps, or
so those are traffic engineering issues that would be assessed as part of detailed design. Again, one of the things we're going to need to demonstrate. I guess one of the other things for that intersection upgrade is it's also the trigger for enabling a second public transport loop through Kotiri Summerhill. So again, part of the broad proposal for Kotiri is demonstrating that the way in which we're planning for growth is to Sam's earlier point, that supporting a mode shift as well, because as I said, there's submissions that are challenging the growth, including from Waka Kotahi because of the impact on the network and traffic safety issues. So.
Brilliant. Thank you. And just finally, is there a high-res map of the structure plan, 7A.4? I just couldn't read the key and I wondered if there's a high-res one.
Yes, there is on the web page, which I'm happy to circulate afterwards.
That'd be great. Thank you very much. Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, David. Thanks, Sam. My questions are, I guess, really around the equity issues that are raised by a $70 million bill that is reflecting both costs of new development and existing development. And David, you've alluded to some of that already in some of your earlier response, but I guess how practically can we go about understanding in greater detail the equity issues that are raised there, and then what are the potential tools to resolve that?
Yeah, well part of the process for the LTP is going to be making this and they are judgment calls about the different funding pools for these programs. So and I guess part of the answer to the Mayor's questions earlier is what proportion of these programs are going to be funded by rates versus development contributions versus Waka Kotahi funding. So I guess in a perfect world, if you were to wind back the clock 30 years, you would work out what's required to sort of service a whole Summerhill Kotiri development and then think about the most equitable way of funding that. The reality is what we have is a suburb which is 2/3, 3/4 built, and we're coming in relatively late in the process and thinking about, you know, what is required to finish it, for want of a better term. So ultimately, you can't, to Mr. Mayor's point, we can't be asking the 1,000 sections who come last to pay for everything. They should be paying a proportion of the growth costs for these works, but ultimately it will be ratepayers that will be required to pick up, because there's an existing level of residents, obviously in Kotiri, Summerhill. But we will also be doing business cases to try and get as much support as we can from Waka Kotahi to help co-fund these projects.
Thank you. So just so I've got it clear, then the development charges that have been paid, or contributions that have been paid over the last several decades up there, have had no contribution towards the 70 million.
There would have been what we call sort of broader placeholder programs in the development contributions policy to support growth at Kotiri, but probably not as specific as what we have here. Again, I think what you're seeing, you know, every 3 years, and you know, as I said earlier in the introductory comments, I think what the NPSUD has done is driven a much stronger correlation between growth planning and infrastructure planning than what we have seen in the past. It's always been there, but it's probably it's probably been more of a generic assessment with placeholder programs. So the challenge with all of this is the more you understand infrastructure and the cost of growth, then you're better able to equitably fund it. So what we are doing with all of our growth areas now is trying to, as best as possible, understand what's required to service them.
Thanks. Finally then, just to understand around the potential for ratepayers in future to be contributing to this, will there be information analysis coming to us to support a conversation around potentially using targeted rates versus general rates to address some of the backlog?
Yeah, well, certainly that should be, should be something that's considered as part of the rates review, and being, you know, potentially more agile in terms of how we're considering the costs that the city's facing and how they're funded. It's certainly something we flagged with the work we've done on Te Utu Tanganui, and the growth planning there, recognising that we will again be facing big infrastructure costs to support that area.
Thanks. So it would need to be enabled through the rates review then in order to be considered around a Kotiri?
I think rather than answering that now, I'd just suggest that that's something that is discussed, you know, because these programs will need to be prioritised as part of the LTP. And in doing that, we can think about the best way in which they're funded.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you. Thank you to you both. There's no further questions. Appreciate the presentation of this report.
Sorry, just one point I just want to, I guess, reiterate, reflecting on the nature of the questions and the comments, is I would reiterate that the exact nature of the upgrades that are required, I guess required, will be a subject of debate as part of the hearing. So we do need to remain agile about how the LTP, I guess, responds to that process that will be running alongside it.
Appreciate it. Sorry, that's generated a further question, has it? So might just leave you in those hot seats. And Councillor Barrett.
Apologies, Mr. Chair, I got so wrapped up in funding mechanisms I forgot my second question. The pricing that's been done around the stormwater side, has that been purely around getting water to where it needs to go, or is there an amenity and a habitat kind of component to that pricing as well?
Yes, there is an amenity and habitat component to that pricing.
And I guess what would you describe in a generic sense the level of amenity and habitat consideration that's been built in?
So there's planting and obviously the natural engineering solutions that will fall out of the detailed design process, but as part of our obligations, both to the Regional Council and the National Policy Statement on Freshwater, we will have to consider the habitat requirements as part of the consenting those ponds.
Great, thank you. Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you. Thank you to you both again for presenting that report and answering those questions. I'll move the recommendations before us that the committee note the infrastructure program identified in attachment 1 of the Okautere Urban Growth Area Memorandum to support proposed district plan change G for prioritisation as part of the 2024 long-term plan process, seconded by Councillor Naylor. Open for any comment, debate. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, unfortunately, the horse has bolted a bit here. The $69 to $70 million price tag is eye-watering for an established subdivision. And unfortunately, our city's just-in-time infrastructure model of a few decades ago, which I'm glad has changed, has come back to bite. You do the math. 70,000 per section is Hamilton, Auckland numbers, and we're just becoming very, very unaffordable. So yes, it can be clawed back. I understand we're going to have some challenges with our government friends at NZTA and the far right around the roading, and look, it can happen, and I hope it does. The DCs, residential DCs, you know, we have to have a close look at those, and then possibly other government pockets of funding as well. Otherwise, this is going to become very, very difficult. So reluctantly, look, I'm going to agree to this and support your, Mr. Chair, your motion. But just signalling, we can't fund this alone by rates. It's just so unaffordable, and we've just got to either get some partners around us, or we have some residential DCs that reflect, you know, and some of you voted against it when we did push them up a while ago. We're still one of the lower. Commercial and industrial, I understand we're probably at the other end, perhaps too high, but at residential, I suspect we might be just a bit too low. So we're going to have help on this, but let's debate it at the LTP, because it is eye-watering for an established subdivision. If it was brand new greenfields, I would say we're probably in, but we wouldn't be doing it for 1,000 sections. We'd be doing it for 3,000 sections. So, we just need to be very mindful of the affordability question here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett, followed by Councillor Bowen.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Really wanted to acknowledge and appreciate seeing these numbers and seeing them, albeit it would have been great 30 years ago, I guess, whoever was around the table then, but, you know, at least getting some visibility now and to help us do some thinking about how we do approach this. It opens up some deep questions about equity and how you actually fund things that are in many ways retrospective, but also necessary to continue the trajectory that suburb has been put on, and you know, addressing a number of current deficits, especially in the transport network, but also deficits in terms of how stormwater is managed in that area. So it's been really good just getting a heads up around some of the scale of the numbers there, and to be working with partners and thinking about options in terms of what is a fair and equitable way to work through quite a sizable phase of investment coming up for just one specific part of our city, and noting that our city is looking to deliver high quality infrastructure outcomes in a number of new areas. So the number that we have in front of us starts to add up when we start to look around all the other areas of greenfield development in the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just wanted to comment, I think reflecting the officer's comment that this final PCG is the straw that's breaking the camel's back here in terms of the infrastructure in Okautere. And several of these elements that are in the plan in front of us have been projects that have come through long-term plans and annual budgets in previous years, noting particularly the proposal for mid-block active mode crossings at Silkwood Place in there, and the active modes connection from Summerhill through to Johnston Drive. Those have been persistent requests from the community over the last at least 5 years to my memory. So what we're seeing here is that the infrastructure is already groaning under the weight of that development up in Akotare Summerhill. These solutions that are coming to us aren't just because of that last 1,000 residential blocks to be built up out there. It's because this part of the city needs this development. And I'm not 100% on board with all of them as suggested. There'll be a serious prioritisation programme that comes through LTP, but there is no question that some of this is way overdue, and it's time that we pushed that forward, considered it as part of PCG and the next long-term plan, and this gives us some good information going into that process, so thank you to the officers.
Thank you. Councillor Zebulon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I also just wanted to reflect the Mayor's comments and also from our Chief Planning Officer that this is the cost of growth, and our first goal, goal number 1, is currently an innovative and growing city. So we've set ourselves a goal that we will be a growing city, and I think we do need to be mindful and realistic about the gap between our goals and our aspirations and our ability to afford them, even intergenerationally. So yeah, the cost of growth is a very hard one amongst many other hard things to stomach at the moment. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. No further speakers, so I'll invite a vote. Votes for, none against. Thank you. Just move us on to item 17. And just noticed Bryce just departed us, but call on the next item nevertheless. Pioneer Reserve proposal to grant an easement on reserve land to Powerco. Just pause a minute just for the officer. That's great. Just come in. Got his skates. Thank you, Bryce. We're going to take item 17, the proposal to grant the easement for the reserve land to Powerco. Floor's yours.
All right, there we go. We got it going. Battle with technology. Yeah, kia ora, councillors. Look, relatively administrative matter. Looking to formalise an arrangement. Unfortunately, when the infrastructure was put in by Powerco, it was slightly offset from where the plans were agreed to by the contractor. And thus we're just trying to tidy this up from a Reserves Act standpoint. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Open it up. Are there any questions on this report? Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How many street lights have we got out around the city at the moment? Do you know?
I'm not sure if that's a relevant question,
Yeah,
but
not sure how that's necessarily relevant to this. At last count, I think it was about 155.
Right. Are they all our responsibility to fix?
Sorry, Councillor Arnott, just the line of questioning for relevant of the topic being reported is probably a mismatch.
I'll withdraw that.
I'm sure the
Thank you.
officers will be able to answer that query offline. Do you have any other questions? Okay. There are no other questions. Thank you, Bryce. Pretty straightforward report. I'm prepared to move the recommendations approving notification that the public of the proposal to grant an easement at Pioneer Reserve, Palmerston North, to convey electricity to Powerco in accordance with Section 48 of the Reserves Act 1977, and that the committee note that the land area affected by the easement for Powerco is described in Lot 2 DP 88159, seconded by Councillor Naylor. Any comments or debate? There being none, I'll therefore put the vote. That's passed unanimously, 13 votes for. I'd like to call you forward again, Bryce, for item 18, which is the 279 Albert Street, part of the Hokowhitu domain, proposal to continue supporting Hokowhitu Bowling Club Incorporated by notifying the public of the intention to grant a community occupancy via a lease of council land.
Kia ora again. Yes, I've brought a few of these papers up recently as well. This is essentially step one in the process to undertake the public consultation, and then from there, should we have any feedback to be considered, and will be done so in a separate report, as will actually granting the lease. So just to confirm, this is not actually granting a new lease, this is just seeking to go out for public consultation.
Thank you, Bryce. We've got questions. First, the Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Bryce. Just how many members has Hokowhitu got? Do you know?
Ooh, good question. Let me just see if they
10, 20?
Oh, no,
30?
it's more than that. I don't know off the top of my head in terms of active members. I understand they've been relatively steady in terms of their membership.
So what about 30 odd?
I don't think it's maybe a little bit higher than that, but yes, I couldn't really hazard a guess.
All right.
We have an officer, Aaron Phillips. Do you want to respond if you want to come forward? Sorry, I saw you waving there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry to intrude, but it is covered in the covered in page 224 of the agenda in the report that the Bowls Committee put forward. The occupation application form covers that, which has 40 current members and 20 social members.
Page 224 of the council report, 40 current playing members and 20 social members.
Okay, thank you. That sort of indicates my next question. 2.5, you're talking about, and I have no problems with what you're suggesting in terms of renewing the lease, but you've stated here that the previous lease entered into was 5 years with a right of renewal of another 5. Is this wise continuing that same trajectory when we know that there's movement in bowling clubs? And okay, Hokowhitu mightn't be part of it, but they may be part of it.
Well, I think that's probably a decision for yourselves to make. This is ultimately looking to enter into or propose to enter into a new relationship with them. As I said, their membership has been steady. The alternative option would be to not undertake this process.
I'm not suggesting that. I'm just trying to get a bit of background why your advice is to enter into effectively a 10-year lease. Yeah.
We could take a shorter term, could be an alternative that could get worked through. Standard practice with these community organisations is 5 + 5.
Yeah, I get that under normal circumstances, but this isn't normal circumstances, so yeah. Okay, I'm entering into comment, sorry, I'll leave it a comment, thank you.
Councillor Barrett, and then we'll go online to Councillor Hancock.
Thanks. I guess just following on from the Mayor, then what would be the implications if we went to a year by year type of lease arrangement?
Ultimately, the club owns the club rooms themselves and the buildings. Typically, when we've had these conversations with these organisations in the past, so granted, to be very clear, we haven't had this conversation with the Hokowhitu Bowling Club specifically, but typically it's around encouraging them to invest into their property accordingly and keeping it fit for purpose. If they were only going to have a year-by-year tenure, for instance, that gives them potentially some challenges around seeking external funding and may also potentially impact their confidence around continuing to invest into their assets on the property.
Mm-hmm. Right, thank you. Also wanted to understand just what constraints the Reserves Act places in terms of business and commercial use of these types of facilities.
Yeah, The Reserves Act, well, it is zoned recreational, this land that they're on, so the primary purpose of the operation is to be recreational, and that, yeah, Aaron might be able to build on that. He's probably more of a Reserves Act expert than myself, but yeah, essentially it evolves around the primary use. We do encourage our community organisations to be trying to maximise the use of facilities, and so I note in their supporting information that they've provided, they talk about a number of the other activities that go on outside of bowls, which I guess is more than supported from our point of view.
So in terms of the business use that they've indicated in their application, do we understand the nature and kind of scope of that?
Yeah, when they're referring to commercial in this sense, and I just sought some clarification before presenting this, they are referring to commercial in terms of making some money, as opposed to a business per se. So by charging some of these organisations to use their facility, that they then use those funds to invest into their property accordingly and support their operations. So by commercial use, they're referring to earning money as opposed to, yeah, running any kind of business per se.
But some of that use in terms of venue for hire then could be effectively making that space available for businesses to run their business from, let's say, on a periodic basis if they needed to run a meeting or a conference or some sort of gathering?
It still needs to comply with the requirements of the land and the primary use. So there are some restrictions on what you can do in terms of a Reserves Act and what you can do. I mean, it is zoned as recreational. Are we across every booking from an officer standpoint? No, we're not. So I couldn't categorically say they've never leased it out for a function or something from a more business point of view, but should a business start to operate there on a regular basis, that sort of steps out of the bounds of sort of maximising use and actually changing the primary use, which would trigger a different process.
Great, thanks. And is that made clear in our current kind of lease arrangements?
Yes, so the lease is very explicit in terms of primary use and what you can do on the premises, and it does talk, they don't have the ability to do any subleasing or anything to that nature without our approval.
Great, so it would be enforceable then if there were concerns?
Yes, and we have had one situation in my time at council where we did have a community organisation who owned a building leasing out to something that was, I guess, outside the primary use of the land, and for those councillors who were here a few years ago, we dealt with that one accordingly, and that lease came to an end.
Great, thank you for those responses, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Thanks, Bryce. I'm just wondering if we want to consider a shorter term than 5 years. Are you able to give us any advice about when the appropriate time to consider? Should that be something that we indicate now prior to public notification, or is that something that can be decided following public notification?
I would suggest best practice is probably indicating it now, so we can go and have that conversation with the club directly, and that will that also gets mentioned in the consultation we do too. Ultimately, the final decision will be step 3 of this process, and council at that time can choose whatever term they chose. So you have some freedom there, but I would suggest courtesy and best practice would be to tell them now if that's what you were considering.
Thank you. And in terms of shorter terms, is there any practice that we should, is there any norm, I mean, is yearly too short, or could we consider a 2 or 3? I mean, is there anything to guide us as to how much warning they would need to have, or time frame to have if anything was to change?
There's no legislative guidance, I suppose. For what it's worth, my professional advice might be that a meeting in the middle might be a 3+3 or something to that extent.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to call on Councillor Hancock. I did skip you, sorry. So if you'd like to come in.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I think Bryce has actually answered my question because the premises is actually used for other community events, so that really sort of covered that. So, but I may comment just depending on how things pan out.
Great, thank you. There's no further questions, Bryce. So I appreciate you presenting this report. We have an additional recommendation, or a recommendation proposed in the name of the Mayor, seconded by Councillor Finlay, which is just getting typed up, which we would consider potentially being alongside as a third recommendation to 1 and 2. Are you happy to move 1 and 2, Mr. Mayor, in that vein? And Councillor Finlay, are you happy to second? I'll give you the floor, Mr. Mayor, if you'd like to speak to it, and speak to the recommendation what's before us. Oh, gotcha.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, we've got the recommendations up there that we continue to support the Hokowhitu Bowling Club. I'll speak about that in a moment. That we note that the land is reserve, and there's a number of different lot parcels there, and that we ask the Chief Executive to enter into a lease agreement with the bowling club for a period not less than 5 years, and I'll give you some rationale why. I think yearly, I mean, there was a bit of questioning around why we would do this. I've been in the position as the Mayor signing a few things where we have gone into some very lengthy lease negotiations, and things change. We know that there's going to possibly be a bowling, combined bowling facility, and Hokowhitu may not be part of that. But let's just keep the options open for everybody. But yearly's too short. We can't go down that. Anybody that's involved in clubs will know you do this, and you do need a bit of tenure. 5 years, I think, keeps some tenure in it. It's respectful of this club. They're nearly 90 years young, and I just teased out. I actually wanted you to tell me some real numbers, Bryce. So thank you for saying there's nearly 60 members there. That tells me that there is a bit of heart, there is a bit of life in the club, and that's great. I know some people that are in the club, and they're not a profit-making facility, so please, councillors, don't go down those rabbit holes. They lease or have a rental for other clubs like Probus, Tai Chi, garden clubs, and they need a little bit of that extra income because that helps them paint the building or do some repairs and maintenance to their facilities. And often the members are actually the same people within those facilities or connected. They don't have the big 21sts or, it's not a booze barn. So please be respectful of that. But look, 5 years I think gives the officers some scope as well, and it is respectful for the organisation, but it also keeps a bit of powder dry for both the bowling club and the council when we come to have perhaps another talk in 5 years' time, if this is successful. So ask you to support it. I think it's a nice, happy medium, and it keeps everybody in a win-win position. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Finlay as the seconder to be our next speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I myself have spoken to 3 different groups there at the Hokowhitu Bowling Green, a Probus club, a garden club, and another elderly club. And I remember talking to the older persons group that was meeting there. I said, why do you meet here? Because you were quite a small group. Could you not get something a little bit better? There's nothing cheaper in town. The answer was, they don't do it as a profit. They do it. They actually were helping this organisation by giving the facilities to them. It was basically to cover the power and the use of facilities. And there's no profit in it.
Thank you. I'm going to call on Councillor Hancock online.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, I was just really going to echo the conversation that the Mayor has actually added to the debate. The bowling club there has got a very significant investment in the premises, and I think probably to limit it to anything less than 5 years would actually be disingenuous of the council. So I'll be fully supportive of the 3 recommendations which are before us. So And it's really to reiterate too that this is actually a community-wide facility. It's not just for the bowling club itself, and so therefore it has value and merit for the community. So those are my comments. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Naylor.
Mr. Chair, I did want to seek a comment from officers about the third recommendation, given that the first two recommendations talk about us indicating to our community our intention, and that we'd be seeking community views. The third recommendation sort of indicates us setting a term in concrete before we've done that. So I just would like to ask officers if the third recommendation is appropriate in its current wording, if we're yet to consult the community, or whether that would need to be decided following the consultation.
Sure. Bryce, I accept you to come forward to respond to that.
I think it refers to intent. I suppose you could make a slight tweak to say if a lease is entered, then that the lease would be no longer than 5 years, so you could sort of reframe it a little bit around that, which probably still reflects the intent, but yeah, wouldn't necessarily tie us into anything from a proposal standpoint.
Okay. And we can, that was the intent from the recommendation anyway, I believe. So 3, that the chief executive enter into a lease if agreed or whatever. If we can, there's other speakers. Mr. Mayor, did you want to propose that in your own words, or are you happy for wordsmithing here? Yep. Okay, great. In the meantime, I'll call on Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This might be a bit of contribution to the wordsmithing. I'm trying to understand the implications of saying not less than 5 years. It seems to me that opens up potentially quite a long-term lease. I just wanted to understand where this is going, so I might wait for the redraft.
I'll just come back to you, Mr. Mayor, if you're happy with that wording, just yes or no, or unless you want it adjusted. Yep. Okay, the mover and the seconder are happy with that wording adjustment. That captures the intent. Councillor Barrett, do you have further thought? I might need you to just cue yourself again. The floor's yours.
Thank you. While I have some sympathy for number 3, I probably have a lot more comfort with 1 and 2 proceeding at this stage, given that we're looking for public comment into a process around making a decision about granting a lease or not, and would prefer to be considering number 3 once we've heard that public comment. So probably where I sit on this is supporting 1 and 2. And not supporting 3 at this stage, because I'd like to see before committing to something there.
Okay. I know Mr. Chief Executive is indicating he'd like to make a comment, but I wouldn't typically allow it mid-debate, if that's okay. I think we can handle it from here. Councillor Naylor, final speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having that clarification from the officers is helpful, but from my perspective, reading the wording that we still have in front of us for recommendation 3, I won't be supporting that. I'm happy to support us going out for public, to notify the public on this. But the principles of us seeking community feedback on any issue should be that we remain open to what the community might want to say to us. And if the community have comments in regard to the term of the lease, then I would want to be open-minded about that and not set anything into concrete at this stage prior to that community consultation. So from my perspective, recommendation 3 does still go against the principles of what we should be doing when we ask our community for feedback. That sort of locks us in to say that if we are going to proceed with a lease, that it would definitely not be less than 5 years. So I will support the first 2 recommendations, but not the third one.
I'll speak into this. I actually believe the 3 gives guidance of where we want to steer things. I don't think it compromises 1 or 2. I will take notice with the comments that we might separate 3 from the vote, take 1 and 2 separately before taking 3. But other than that, I want to pass to the Mayor if you wish a right of reply. Can you just cue yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, please, people, this club's been around for 87 years, and here we are doing the whole process thing again. Look, we've got to give some guidance here. I mean, some of you have spoken about a yearly thing, you've spoken about commercial activities. Don't be disingenuous to these people, all right? I really do have some issues with, we've got to give some guidance. So and by the other token too, some guidance to officers as well. We've got to be careful that we don't tie ourselves up in knots at the other end as well. So look, I think this is fair. It's not disingenuous to the applicant. They've given a very, very strong application of why they want it to continue. They've got a significant asset there. And I know some of you may want to go even less, but please, anybody that's been involved in a club will know that this is the right thing to do. They've got to give these people some security of tenure. If we have 20 people, and we know how it works with submissions, it can be stacked. People come in, say, no, we don't want that club there. And then all of a sudden, those that want to fall down that rabbit hole, go down that rabbit hole. Please, don't be disingenuous, support this. It gives some guidance to everybody. I don't think it's breaking any rules unless you're totally, totally process-driven. So please support it.
Thank you. That concludes the debate. I'd now like to put, so we're clear, recommendations 1 and 2 first. That's passed 12 votes for and 1 against. Now I'll put recommendation 3. That's passed 9 votes for and 3 against. That brings us to item 19, which is the report of 119 Highbury Avenue, part of the Tuia Park. Proposal to continue support Te Whatu Rāranga or Highbury Weavers by notification of intention to grant community occupancy via a lease of council land and buildings. Invite Bryce back to the table.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Same step in the process as the previous paper. One thing I would just like to clarify, the Highbury Weavers have actually occupied the site prior to 2013, as the report reflects. However, a large part of that was in an informal sort of month-by-month sense, as opposed to the the more formal sort of lease, which is currently just expired. So hence the paper. I guess just wanted to notify that as a slight correction. Any questions?
Thank you. Open it up for any questions. There being none. Thank you, Bryce.
Thank you.
As Chair, I'm happy to move both recommendations before us. I won't read through the text. They're the same that are in the order paper that are presented on screen. Look for a seconder. Councillor Naylor. Open it up for any comment or debate. There being none, I'd now invite a vote. That is passed. 12 votes for, unanimously. Thank you. Our final item, item 20, which is the committee's work schedule, and invite our CFO. We've got no comments. If available to respond to any questions regarding the work schedule, open it up for any queries. Councillor Naylor.
Thanks. My only question is item number 6 on the work schedule, which is the draft interim speed management plan. And it talks about a report going to the extraordinary meeting on the 11th of October, but we've just approved the consultation period being October and that coming back in December. So I just wonder if there's a reason for that report, or if it just needs to be changed to a later date.
That was highlighted in the report today. There's 2 separate reports coming forward. One is around the speed limits, which are interim around the schools, which was separate to today's agreement. You happy with that, David Murphy? Yep.
Okay, that's
Does
helpful.
that clarify?
Thank you. Yep.
Yep. Any other questions? There being none, I'll move the work schedule be received, dated September 2023, seconded by Councillor Naylor. Any comments? I invite a vote. That's passed unanimously, 13 votes for. Can I now call on our Deputy Mayor to close us with karakia?
Tēnā koe, Mr Chair, o tira tēnā tātou, ngā kai konihira me ngā kai mahi katoa kei muri i ahau. Thank you, Mr Chair, also to the councillors and to our officers who have supported us today. The karakia that I'll finish with is one that is called Whakarongo Akiau, and it refers to us listening to everything within our environment and taking cognizance of the needs and working collaboratively, which I think we have done. Nō reira, tēnā koutou. Whakarongo Akiau ki te tangi a te manu a te mātui. Tui, 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 tui a. Tui a i runga, tui a i raro, tui a i roto, tui a i waho, tui a ki te here tangata. Ka rongo te pō, ka rongo te ao, tūturu whakamaua kia tīna. Haumi e, hui e, tae ki, kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor Marshall Lobb. That concludes our business today.